Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by All Voices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. Hello, and welcome to HR Voices. I'm your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm here with Autumn Willingham, Chief People Officer at The Parking Spot. Welcome, Autumn.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I know that it's like, sometimes we were just kind of chatting a little bit before this, and, sometimes we have a few minutes to meet before these recordings, and sometimes you meet as the recording starts and then we get going. And this is kind of one of those scenarios where we just met, but I feel like we're already in a pretty good groove. I think this is going to be good.
Yeah, excited about our chat today.
Yeah, me too. And for those who are new here, I just want to let you know a little bit more about HR Voices. So HR Voices is a podcast that explores real and fabricated anonymized employee relations scenarios through the lens of experienced HR and people leaders. Guests, like Autumn, are going to evaluate realistic workplace situations and demonstrate how they would assess risk, apply judgment, and design practical responses. So the goal is to reveal how strong HR leaders think when they're facing ambiguity, not necessarily to find a single correct answer, because as we know in HR, there so rarely is one correct answer. We're living in the gray pretty much the whole time.
Right. Oh my gosh, yes.
So, Autumn, are you ready for your scenario?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So we're calling this one The Candidate Who Lied About Degrees.
Good one.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. I know we just picked it, but I'm like, we could dig so much into this. So during a post-offer background check, HR discovers that the company's top candidate for a senior finance role listed an MBA from a university he did not graduate from. He completed 2 years before dropping out. He has 15 years of strong experience, excellent references, and the hiring manager considers him the only qualified candidate for a critical role. HR policy requires rescinding offers for material misrepresentations. The hiring manager argues the degree is irrelevant to actual performance and wants an exception. Legal is split. The candidate, when confronted, apologizes and claims it was a long-ago error he forgot to correct. Okay, so before we get into the he said, she said, he said part of this whole thing, what stands out to you as the most risky or the most unclear in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, what I hear in this is, are we getting what we want to pay for? Are we getting truthfulness? Are we getting someone that we can trust? And when we're hiring any candidate, but certainly one in the position or department of finance, this is, they're going to have access to fiduciary documents, financial records. We need someone that we could trust. And if I were the HR advisor in this scenario, I would immediately start by reframing the issue that way, because this could introduce an untrustworthy risk to the business. We need someone we could rely on.
Yeah. And do you think that the issue for you is more the lack of degree or the misrepresentation part?
Well, no, I think the core issue and how, because in this scenario you mentioned like, well, the hiring manager wants to kind of see past this. This is, and I get it. I'm empathetic. Like, otherwise, we've got, what could be a high potential, high performing person. I would start with let's put the problem in front of us, not between us. And let's look at this factually. I think the core problem is we have someone who is misrepresenting themselves in the hiring process. And we need to make sure that this person has been candid and truthful, and that we're not negligently hiring someone already knowing we have what I would call a red flag concern.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially when even if the scenario ends with the employee forgot to correct the mistake. It was like a long ago mistake that they had this on their resume and they haven't corrected it. Even that, for someone in finance of a certain level, attention to detail is so important, right? So even if it's something like that, it's like, how did you not check that before you applied?
Yeah, I mean, and that's well, first of all, we're asking this person, a future, member or partner in finance, to provide accurate, detail-oriented analysis, and to provide and always represent certainly financial information in an accurate manner, and to make sure that they really know their stuff. And so to miss an important detail And maybe this person is telling the truth that, oh, this was, so long ago. From a performance angle, that's kind of concerning. That's a major detail that was missed. From a candidate transparency, that this is, again, a red flag. I mean, how could you not fix the issue today if this was a problem long ago? So just multiple things that I think stand out. We would want to consult our hiring manager that let's not look at the individual. Let's not get fixed on this one person. There's other great candidates that we can go after that don't make critical errors in their resumes and that represent themselves accurately.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of funny because if not this specific type of situation, but something similar, we see a lot of this happening now in different ways, right? I mean, I know that a lot of my, former friends in recruiting or current friends, former fellow recruiters, they're experiencing misrepresentation in resumes at some points. There's a lot of noise in recruiting right now, and it's really hard to tell sometimes if someone actually does have the skills that they say that they do or the experience that they do. And so I think that's why this scenario, even though it's so specific about a candidate misrepresenting a degree, there are, I think, going to be a lot of things that we can sort of talk through and how you kind of dig into this that are probably going to be relevant for someone who's experiencing an adjacent type of situation at their own organization, right? So there's the misrepresentation part, there's the attention to detail part, and then there's the question of is this person ultimately then not qualified for that role? That's another thing that could be out there that kind of needs to be evaluated depending on your hiring policies and the qualifications for that specific role. So, who do you want to start talking to in this scenario, and what do you want to understand from them?
I would definitely want to start, you know, to respond to the last point you made around, well, is this really a qualification that's necessary? And the way that I would navigate that with the hiring manager or the recruiter is, well, let's balance what the MBA degree and how it's credentialed. How have we hired previous candidates in prior roles, or this, let's say, this current job opening? Did we already tell other candidates or decline them because they didn't have an MBA? So what precedent are we modifying or establishing by, if we were to move forward with this candidate, to say yes, well, although we discovered, you didn't admit, the candidate didn't admit, we discovered that they misrepresented the degree. I would go back to the hiring team. I'm looking at what are the true qualifications for this position and say, why would we make the pivot? And if the education credentials that comes with an MBA based off a certain role in the position, or if it's just been a historic practice, is this the moment to reevaluate that solely to make an adjustment to hire this candidate? Or is this something that was necessary to reevaluate anyhow? And I think, it will depend on your specific discussion, your specific needs, or how critical it is to fill this position. But I think ultimately the point will always remain and it will always linger. You know, can we trust this particular candidate? Even if we were to make that exception, does that change in any way that this is the best person for that role? And I would just have an icky feeling about that anyhow. Our role is just to not make the decision for the hiring managers, but our job is to present, here's a good option and here's the best one. And when I frame things that way, any manager would always want to go for the best option, which in this scenario is likely no need to change the credentialing. We just, had a candidate that misrepresented and we're going to go find someone who's a better fit, more honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially whenever you submit an application to an organization, you have to sign off that everything that you have and everything that you say in there is true, which, again, people will check that box or sign that depending on what type of application it is. And, probably not expect people to check. But if we're not going to act on that, then what's the point of having it?
Yeah, no, you're spot on because then you circle back to values. And if your company values or leadership values are integrity, honesty, high quality, performance, accuracy, I mean, how does that particular candidate calibrate against those values? And I think it makes it even clearer what the best option is.
Yeah. And I think in this scenario too, you're dealing with competing priorities, right? As you do whenever we do in HR, because we have, the side that we have to sort of play, I guess you'll put it, where, we're sort of really stress testing the manager's decision. We're sort of saying like, you say that this person's the only qualified person, but we see that they've misrepresented themselves. So then we disagree with their qualification, or there's something here that's missing and we need to kind of get as close to the same page as possible, right? So how do you how do you balance, or how do you approach this conversation with that hiring manager? Because figure finance role, person with an MBA, they're the only qualified person. They've probably been recruiting for this role for a while, or they feel like they've found like, the golden ticket. They're like, this is the perfect person. So how do you line up that conversation with the hiring manager who kind of has the most to win or lose other than the candidate?
Yeah, I would start with empathy. My approach would probably be something like this. Hey, hiring manager, like, I know that we've been recruiting for this position for so long, and we were really excited about this candidate. I just want to talk to you about how you're feeling about how we discovered not having an MBA. How did that make you feel? And kind of get some rapport and responses based off of that. Then I would start leaning into what we want most out of this position. Do we want someone to fill this role in the now? Do you want this role or see this position growing with the business? And as whoever the candidate is, evolves with the business, hopefully, as part of succession planning, would you want this? What values would you want out of this person? And again, I would start centering my approach around this good option to hire, best option not to hire. And I would coach them into answering these questions and helping them arrive at the best answer by getting them to say out loud, I do want someone who has high integrity, someone in finance who's accurate. I don't want to have a dark cloud from day one if I were to hire this person and have a big question mark. I want someone that comes in motivated for the right reasons, with integrity, without question, and accuracy as a high performer, which is, what we want from day one to ensure that the quality of our candidates are never compromised. We will never compromise those values over policy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's smart to take it to the values too, because that's always when you really kind of need like a grounding perspective or a grounding framework to kind of guide those conversations. They're the best ones to sort of sit within. And probably also the competencies for the role, right? Assuming those are even partially scoped out. Having hired for finance many times in my HR career, I know that, trust and accuracy are two very important parts of that particular role. I guess you could say in any role at the company, but with finance especially, I feel like it's weighted differently because they have all of the keys to the kingdom in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. And I think that's the tough part. Now, I guess like so as you're talking to the hiring manager, what do you say to the candidate, or what do you suggest they say to the candidate?
Great question. Thanks for asking this. I would not over elaborate with the candidate. First of all, in most states, it's not even really required. We don't have to necessarily go into too many details about why someone is or isn't hired, as long as it's not based off a discriminatory reason. And that's not the case here. What I would say to this candidate is first, thank them for applying. I would let them know that they were seriously considered, that we had some dialogue internally, but ultimately the decision was made, noting that I'm not naming who made the decision, but I would say the decision has been made that we're not going to move forward at this time. And I would leave it there. I anticipate the candidate would ask a follow-up question. Well, did this have anything to do with, the NBA error? And I I would say in most cases, as long as you can keep your response brief, and limit it in scope, I would say, yes, this was part of our decision-making process, and we just don't feel comfortable with how it was represented, on your resume. And again, thank you for your time, and end the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like from this scenario, and this is a fabricated scenario too, right? So
Yeah.
we have to take some of it, what's in there with a grain of salt. But it sounds like in this scenario, there is an actual policy that requires rescinding offers for material misrepresentation. So it
Yeah.
might not even have to be about, we're not comfortable with this. It might just have to be about it, this is the policy. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And that might have to be enough because then something you said earlier is whatever decision you make here could set a precedent because maybe this is the first time that policy is being enforced or that it even comes up, right? And how you handle it sort of sets the precedent for if you make an exception for this candidate or this, potential new hire person you're rescinding the offer from, if you make an exception here, then you're going to have to make an exception everywhere to show that it was not a biased type of exception.
Well, yeah, that's a perfect alternative way to share that with the candidate, that we don't see this as an opportunity to break with our current policy. Yeah.
Yeah. And who ultimately owns the outcome in a scenario like this? So someone has to decide what to do with the candidate, right? Like, does HR decide and enforce that on the manager? Does HR present options like you mentioned and then leave it on the hiring manager? And then who ultimately owns that outcome and is accountable for whatever fallout happens after it? I know it's kind of
Yeah.
two questions, but they're combined in my mind.
No, there are 2 perfect questions that run in parallel. I have worked in organizations where perhaps business leaders, operational leaders, they rely on HR to be the full 100% guardrail of policy and make hiring, firing decisions. And if, your listeners work in an organization like that, then go ahead and stand in that authority. However, I I typically don't lead that way. My preference is human resources serve as consultant or advisory positions. My belief is our role as HR practitioners is to empower business leaders to make the best business decisions. So when it comes to hiring, firing, I would always present that the managers own these decisions. And so that's why I position these type of scenarios in my past similarly. Like, this is a good decision you can make, but this is the best one. And I have to tell you, not that I've encountered this fictitious scenario like to the T. I have
Yeah.
had similar ones, and it has never failed me when I frame it that way, because it is how you consult and coach and get them to say out loud, I want to make the best decision here, and thank you for helping me see through this clearly and guiding me there. That way we're never telling them what to do. They appreciate that in most
Yeah.
cases.
In most cases is the key term. But
Yeah.
yeah, even if not at first, right? I think something that can really work in everyone's favor in a scenario like this is a little bit of time. Not, delaying the decision for too long, right? But
Yeah.
but maybe giving it a few days so that the manager can kind of, you know, process a little bit and then have a little bit more time to make that call to talk to you because at first you can imagine they're going to be frustrated, right? They're already pushing, they're saying this person's the only person who can do this job. They're pushing to just sort of say just stay out of my way and let me do my thing is kind of how I read this fictitious scenario on behalf of the hiring manager. So I think giving a little bit of time to say, hey, let's give ourselves a few days to
Yeah.
figure out what we want to do about this. Tell the, we'll tell the manager, we'll tell the candidate, we'll tell everybody that we all need to take some time. How much time is too much time to wait for something like this to
Yeah,
make
I
a
think
decision and inform everybody?
yeah, I mean, it's hard to put a point on it, because I think, if your hiring manager is willing to say, "Well, let's keep this candidate warm," the misrepresenting candidate, we can keep them warm and while we explore additional candidates. Now, in this scenario, it already took a while to find that. So I mean, to directly answer your question, I wouldn't let more than a week go by. Certainly knowing that the way that I recommend reframing it in terms of a values-based decision and a policy-based decision, it shouldn't take that long to make that decision. But I mean, my sweet spot, just a couple of days max, but definitely I think a week might be a little too long.
I agree. I agree. Because then it's like you're leaving the candidate hanging. They could
Yeah.
have other roles that they're interviewing for, right? Like it's not fair. It's not fair to them. They also kind of need to be able to know where they are instead of being
Yeah.
stuck in limbo. And to your point, if you take too long to make the decision, then the question becomes, well, if this was so straightforward, then how come it took you so long to make the call? And that can just raise questions that
Right.
you don't want raised, right? That don't
Yes.
need to be raised.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you wanna be decisive when it comes to values, which is why, take the night to think it over is probably what I would say at a max,
Yeah.
but no more than 2. This is a
Yeah.
we wanna guide them with straightforward values-based decisions that should not really be compromised. That doesn't break.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like kind of they have to get on board with what the decision has to be
Yeah,
in something like
exactly.
this.
Yeah, give them time, like, that's where the empathy comes in. Give them time to
Mhm.
get on board with what they have to do. It's not what they
Yeah.
wanna do, but what they have to do.
Yeah. And give them space to be frustrated probably too. And just because
Yeah.
it is frustrating, it's like, look, I get it. I want this role filled too. But
Yeah,
here we are.
exactly.
Yeah. So, do you see any patterns repeating across situations like this? When I say patterns in situations like this, I mean hiring managers looking to make exceptions because a candidate is perfect, despite things like this, like despite either not having the experience that they said or despite, giving a bad reference, for example. Like, what patterns do you see repeating in these kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, great question. We've all been there where I have this fun term, like a candidate crush. It's like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
they were perfect. I could never dream of another better candidate for this role. And it's hard to break up with your candidate crush.
Yeah.
But if there is a pattern, which I would say, at least we're all entitled to this one, you know, back and forth, maybe two, but it's definitely a pattern if there's willingness to break from qualifications, I would say, well, we need to probably revisit with this hiring manager about what we decided or agreed upon in the candidate intake call. Hopefully, your listeners are doing that. But
Hmm.
we center ourselves back to the beginning. This is what we said we wanted and needed in this role, and what would be a good enough position or reason, I should say, to tie break from policy, from what we agreed upon, from historic practices. And just as a note for compliance purposes, if any of your listeners are, part of, they're required under affirmative action plans or compliance purposes, if we start making changes, modifications, exceptions in the middle of a hiring process, that can get us into some really hot water
Right.
as we're changing qualifications for current candidates or interested candidates. So we want to make sure that your hiring process is consistent. Your as long as your analysis is consistent, it could yield different outcomes, but you don't want to start changing your analysis in the middle of the hiring process. That could really lead to some compliance issues. So, good watch
Yeah.
out.
I'm so glad you brought that up because these types of scenarios I've found always come up when there's a bias for that candidate. Whatever that bias might be, right? We went to the same school. We really enjoyed our conversation. Like there's something in this hiring manager's mind that's like this is the only person who's qualified and it has to be a bias because
Yeah.
they're looking past the qualifications and the misrepresentation to justify this, right? And we are all human. We all do this.
Yes.
Like any candidate crush that I've had, that I'm sure anyone has, it's like because there's something about them that's like, oh, they're like me or whatever. That's completely normal. The
Yeah.
thing to do with that is like basically what you do with that. You don't use that
Yeah.
to make hiring decisions, right? You kind of have to hold that up to the consistent criteria that you're holding every candidate to, like you mentioned. So you're not changing the criteria just because of this one candidate who got involved.
Right. And I mean, it's not exactly like dating, but hiring someone, it has a lot of similarities. And so
Yeah.
HR has to be that friend to say, wait a minute, like this is a pattern, friend. Like remember you had that one girlfriend or boyfriend that kept doing that to you. Like, don't change what your values are, what your morals are. You're gonna find that right person for you. And we just have to be that mirror.
Yeah. It's like, we've seen this movie before. Don't do this again.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. And, is there anything that HR leaders can do? And maybe we've kind of touched on this, but just to ask it sort of explicitly, is there anything that HR leaders can do to prepare managers for this kind of moment? Because I feel like every manager has this moment that's like, I know they're not perfect, but so like, what can HR do to prepare them? Is it just making them aware that it might happen? Is it training? Is it a combination of things?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. To prepare for this particular moment, first of all, we hope that it doesn't ever really happen. But I think this is why, annual training or refresher training on biases. And when we hear that word, sometimes in today's climate, we jump to identity biases, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. We're talking
Yeah.
about those affinity biases or a halo horn effect where this person made one error or said one thing you didn't like, and now they do nothing well in the interview. Or the halo, which is, oh my God, you like watching that favorite TV show. So do I. And now like there's this halo
Work
filter on.
here. Here's an
Yeah.
offer. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is important to do, anti-bias training when it comes to recruiting, even for our most seasoned hiring managers and our most seasoned HR professionals. We are not immune to these type of pitfalls. So that's probably the most, tangible way to get ahead of it. But we should always, as HR leaders, we should stay sharp and keep our eyes and ears open when we see these biases start to creep in, and let's not let it fester. Like let's find ways where we can be open and transparent, and I won't even call it like calling it out, but just making them aware and just being that mirror and saying, friendly coachable phrases like, hey, I just want to look out for you here. Let's make sure that we're not I'm taking another look at the candidate intake form, and we agreed that you really want this. We don't want this to happen again. It's so important that you have someone who can present accurately in front of the board. I don't want someone that you can't rely on or makes these type of errors. Does that sound, like someone I should be looking out for and recruiting for? And then you just want those closed-ended. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. And that's what we're looking for. And we know that we're being that best business partner to our
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. I think it's such a good call, just sort of reminding them, reinforcing, because most things are just, awareness and reinforcement, right? Like just make them aware that biases exist whenever you're kicking off a role. You can even have notifications coming out of your ATS for interviewers. It can say, remember, these are things to not judge people for or to not, base your
Yeah.
decision on. It should be based on this. Here are the questions. And then it's just the reinforcement. And I think the consistency in calling it out in scenarios like this and sort of, then holding them accountable to follow through with what the policy is or what the law is in some cases, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good call. Just like a reminder of like, hey, we're all on the same team here. We don't want to open ourselves up to risk because, if HR is on the record for saying that this is a policy that this person would be violating, this is not how this should move forward. And the hiring manager overrules that, the hiring manager's on the hook for that at
Yeah.
the end of the day, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, I don't want that for you if that turns out badly.
Right. Yeah. And we are the gatekeepers of that. And so our, executive leaders count on human resources to be, that weighted balance to make sure that, folks aren't running away with changing standards and expectations about what a hiring process should look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And one final question, because if you can believe it, we're actually at time. So, one final question. This is sort of shifting gears, but is sort of an important, I think, thematic sort of part in scenarios like this. What's one assumption about HR that you think needs to be challenged? Just one.
related or unrelated to this?
It could be related or unrelated, whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, that I think the one challenge that we need to overcome is that we don't contribute to the bottom line when we do.
Yes.
And here's how. Human resources is responsible for supercharging your people analytics. We should know and understand how the business makes money, how your people contribute and drive to these revenue driving decisions. And we need to understand how to attract new talent that will continue to drive profitability or operational efficiency or the best legal consulting, the best, financial analysis or going after to grab new capital. Whatever it is, our job is to attract the best talent. And we have to hold ourselves accountable, but over communicate to our business partners what we're doing and how we're doing it. We're doing this efficiently. In today's world, use leveraging AI and automation. So we're trying to be as efficient as possible. We hold ourselves to speed of talent delivery and we hold ourselves to efficient metrics. And then, opposite of that, when people leave, we have to supercharge our analytics about turnover. And the greatest hidden costs to most organizations' bottom line are the hidden costs of turnover. And this is where HR needs to step in and step it up with how we over communicate how we're going to help solve turnover problems. Because if we have the strategic insight into why do people leave, what makes them stay, what do they value most, and that way we can have that insight to and that insight to stand in the boardroom to say, well, we should invest here this much and invest in this initiative because it's going to solve this problem, which will reduce turnover by this amount. You've got their attention immediately. And that's how you start showing up as a true value add to the business. There are still, unfortunately, a lot of folks that think all we do is just, hire, fire, write policy, and plan parties. That's not what strategic HR should do. So let's all work together to bust those myths.
Yes, yes, yes. I cannot say that yes enough.
Okay.
Yes. And it's so true. Turnover is so expensive. Everything about it is so expensive. And, if you can even see indications of turnover before it happens, that shows up in your people analytics too. And when we bring things up like, hey, these are prior exit interviews. Hey, this is feedback from, these are questions people are having about their managers or about their jobs. That's all data that you can map in that sort of shows you where you might need to be paying attention and where you could be losing people because you lose people mentally before you lose them physically,
Yeah,
right? So find those indications so you can address them before they really fester, right?
exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Autumn, thank you so much. Thank you for being here, for sharing your wisdom, and for chatting with me today. This was really fun.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. And thank you everybody for listening, and I hope everybody has a great day. Bye.